Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Minter Diao. Minter is a speaker on leadership, brand, and digital strategy with a specialization on digital transformation. He's an author of three award-winning books, but today we will speak about his latest book, You Lead, How Being Yourself Makes You a Better Leader. Minter, thank you so much for joining us today.
Alan, un placer. C'est un plaisir. Thank you for having me on. I love this word matters. Life matters, leadership matters, and money does matter too.
Right. Okay. This is the first time, no, maybe not the first time, but one of those rare moments that I speak with a trilingual. Yes, if we could pepper our podcast with a few words in Spanish and French, that would be a delight as long as my Anglo listeners could understand it. I would like to start, Minter, with a little bit of your background. I see you have been a business leader for a long time, but my listeners would like to know more about you.
Well, thank you, Alan. So I spent the biggest part of my career working at L'Oreal, the cosmetics company. And I was there for 16 years. I basically went through the marketing channel. I got various promotions. I ended up running a company, a brand that some of your listeners might know called Redken, which is a professional hair care company that's sold to hairdressers. And then after running them for about 3.5 years worldwide, I was running the professional division in Canada, based in Montreal. And then I was on the executive committee in Paris worldwide, running essentially 8 different functions. Prior to L'Oreal, I had 2 startups. I worked in an investment bank. I was a tennis teacher. I worked in a zoo and an aquarium. And I wrote a novel. And after L'Oreal, I also wrote a few books and did a film and basically try to spend my time elevating the debate and helping companies to transform.
Uh, when you went to school, what did you study? Tennis, filmmaking, business?
Oh, well, so I went to prep school, public school, high school in England until I was 18, and I graduated from Yale University in America, and my major concentration was trilingual literature, where you had to read, write, and speak in a minimum of 3 languages. I also minored in women's studies, which essentially got me to look outside of my mind and figure out how people see things differently. It was an extraordinary experience. I also studied sleep and left-handers.
And trilingual literature, I assume, I don't know why I'm assuming this, but English, French, and Spanish?
Well, you had to speak a minimum of
Okay.
3, and I can get by in Italian and Russian and a little bit in German. And by nature of the topic, where we only had 6 people taking this major, not everyone spoke the same languages. So you inevitably had to learn a little bit about other languages. But once you know a few languages, it helps because you have different frames of references. You understand the different grammatical constructs. And sometimes we were just studying passages in another language. So it's not like you had to read the whole book necessarily in 3, 4, 5 languages.
I find that reading literature, especially literature of many other countries, increase your level of empathy and understanding and acceptance of each other, which is where your life finally led you anyways, which is inclusion and how to be a good leader and be and own yourself, which is remarkable. But with these stories that you did, how you ended up being, I guess you ended up being a tennis teacher because that was your hobby, and but in business, how did that happen?
Well, so tennis. I was at the time I started teaching tennis. I was bankrupt, And I had done this big entrepreneurial activity, a startup. It was a travel agency for musicians. And there I invested all my money and more, went into debt and had to recuperate. So I ended up teaching tennis mostly because I wasn't good enough to win any tournaments to make a livelihood. The business side of things really was, I was just interested in having new experiences. And so I come out of business school, Yale, with literature degree, and I work in banking. And then I start up a high-end luxury goods company, manufacturing high-end travel bags, which are $5,000 and up, and just enjoyed that experience and discovering the leather business and how do you make bags and such. And so I've had one experience after the other, just jumping in, all hands on deck into these new industries. And then I went to business school in France, and I looked at L'Oreal, and I fell head over heels in love with this idea of working in the professional hairdressing industry. I like to tease myself, I suppose, that I got a business degree to become a hairdresser. Of course, I didn't become a hairdresser, but what I did do was became over 16 years a big fan of the hairdressing industry and what it can do for society in general. So that's sort of how all of that came around, if you will. Each time was an opportunity, and the common thread was great experiences and communications, telling stories and enjoying the creation of brands.
Okay, well, I don't know much about cosmetics and not much about L'Oreal either, but you are an expert on brand and digital strategies, and I perceive L'Oreal to be one of those all cosmetic companies, and now we got all these social media influencers who have their own brand and their own millions of followers in, I guess, YouTube and TikTok and all these other, I guess, Instagram. And I wonder a little bit about what's the status of the old guard TV advertisements and big ball advertisement as L'Oreal versus the new generation of cosmetic advertisement.
A revolution is how I'd characterize it. Essentially, L'Oreal has been brilliant at making great products and creating beautiful images that they could push out through the channels, advertising and so on, in two-page advertisements in Vogue, Cosmopolitan magazines, and then on television. All of a sudden, you have this complete uprooting where individuals can speak with sometimes as much, if not more, influence than the whole brand L'Oreal. And that means that they can do influence, but they can also call out when things are bad, like ethics or poor products. And this meant a real shift for L'Oreal and the big players in general in learning how to manage the beast that is social media. And I would say that whereas I was brought up a lot with this, which is we control the communications. Right. As we say in French, on fait de la com. We do communications in a managed manner. We say what we want to say. We craft the narrative. All of a sudden, that's become out of our hands and is in so many different people's hands. And so you have to let go of the ownership, let go of the idea that I can control everything and work with your partners, influencers, and so on. So yeah, quite the revolution.
And okay, and also there is a lot of social causes. You mentioned in your book the example of Nike and how they stand for a particular message, risking alienating some of the other followers or Nike users. So I wonder how much of that is becoming necessary in business. If you don't take a stand, you stand for nothing.
Yeah, and sometimes if you're silent, that's taken as acquiescence or culpability in certain cases. So the issue with a lot of this is actually the fear factor. And if you're in a management that is constantly worried about performance and is fearful of pissing people off, if that's how you sort of go through the door at the beginning of the day, it's very unlikely that you're going to want to stand up for something. So you can end up standing up for things, but that everybody else is doing as well, in which case it's a complete waste of time. It's not that you don't approve of certain things, but trying to make that the flag that you want to fly when everybody else is also flying it is like, well, whatever. So the challenge is having a thing you want to stand up for that stands out as well, and it takes courage to do that, which sometimes means pissing off people, which can include your shareholders, by the way. And that then it really comes down to the governance model that you have. Who owns you? What is the corporate structure that you have, and how much liberty you have to actually push for that? And if you have a situation where you're always worried about your shareholders, it's unlikely you're going to want to be able to or feel the liberty to stand up for something important.
Okay, well, I see a huge problem with, let's say, middle management in this case, because as a middle manager, if you stand up for the wrong thing, you get fired, or you could get fired. So you need a little bit of leeway from upper management to take risk. And if you take risk and the risk turns out okay, then that's great. But if it doesn't turn out okay, you could be fired. So the person who management will be afraid to take any kind of a stand. I wonder how leadership is dripped down to the middle ranks.
So great point, Alain. If you're in the middle of management, you've chosen to work in this company. And before going in, you need to understand a little bit about how the company works. Of course, you can't really understand deeply the culture until you're in it. But the nature of the game is when you're in middle management, you are, at the one hand, trying to please your customers, but you also have a career to manage, and you're managing other people's careers below you. So if your boss or your hierarchy isn't into talking about politics, you can try, you can be bold, you might create a revolution, but the chances are it's not going to work, because that's the reality of life. Sometimes you just have to do what you got to do. And so that what it comes down to is, if you're in middle of management and you see your senior managers moving into positions of authority and prepared to talk about things that are, let's say, politically sensitive, then that is the alleyway that gives you the opportunity and the permission to do it. And here's the only really useful insight that I can think of. Really, as a middle manager, what I certainly always wanted to do when I was in middle management, it was make my boss shine. Mm. So yes, you can call that brown nosing and being, let's say, just kowtowing to the system. But in general, that's how it works. I mean, there are, of course, organizations that are much flatter, but that's what you want to figure out. So if you can do something that stands out, that you feel courageous to do, and it makes your boss look good, then you're onto a winner.
Wow. Okay. So let's go back to your life. You spent 16 years in L'Oreal. Then I don't know, you quit, you retire, and then you became an author. Can you tell us about that transition, and then the first few books that inspire you, that led you to follow this new way of life?
Right. So I left L'Oreal. I'd been working for them for 16 years, and I had essentially been fed up with their management system, which I perceived to be very much around fear and control. And it didn't feel like the place where I was going to gain fulfillment. I also thought that they were going to really struggle with this whole idea of digital. For being an American, I was the only non-French person on the executive committee at the time in Paris. And having lived in Canada and the United States, where I saw what was happening, whether it was YouTube and Facebook in the early days, when I got to France, they were very much behind the eight ball as far as digital was concerned. So I really felt like this wasn't a place where I was going to grow, which was important to me. So I wanted to leave, and taking the bundle of experiences that I had, look at working with other companies and have other experiences, like working in the drinks industry or working in other cosmetics companies, or working in tech. I got a chance to work with Tencent in China or Google, and those are, you know, wonderfully different types of cultures and experiences. And as I got into that, what I realized was that I needed to have more than just a reputation and a past CV that said, you know, big managing director. All that's lovely, but I also needed to establish an expertise. And that's where I came to the idea that I had to write books. And so when I was writing books, some of the things that struck me were the storytelling of someone like a Seth Godin, where he has this way of making, in a very informal way, stories that convert people and make people say, aha, wow, that's cool. And I also had other types of, I mean, as you said, I studied literature, and there's nothing more powerful than to read good literature, developing interesting characters and using words powerfully and interesting without necessarily having to use 4-syllable letters and so on.
Right.
You know, words that are too complicated and convoluted. And I was very impressed with Stephen Covey, for example. All his work and making you responsible for what you do and the time that you have. For example, one of the things I take is, I do not like the phrase, I don't have time.
Mm.
I don't have the time to read. I don't have the time to play tennis. I don't have the time to do whatever it is. No, no, no. I choose not to spend my time to play tennis or to read. So it's really, everybody only has 24 hours in the day. If you choose to spend your time doing something else, you choose to, for example, have kids. Okay, that's your choice. And you can, of course, then be a bad parent or a good parent. That's your choice as far as what you want to and how much time you're going to spend with them. So yeah, that's Covey. He put a good bee in my bonnet with regard to that.
Yes, yeah, his book always brings so many warm memories. Every page was like a new revelation, new paradigm, as he called it. Okay, so how do you come about this book, You Lead? How being yourself makes you a better leader?
Well, and the funny thing is, actually, this book was actually supposed to be my first book. If you can imagine, in 2014, I borrowed 10 days of my time from my wife and so on to go to Dubrovnik into Croatia and to write the book of my life. Because the idea behind this book was, when you lead you inside and outside work. Because I really felt you don't separate who you are at work. You ought to be yourself, both at work and at home. So I wrote that piece, and then I came home, and essentially a few things happened, and I ended up getting an email from a big television company in the United States called PBS. And they said, we've just seen your story about your grandfather. We want to have it on television. So what ends up happening, I end up putting the book down and focusing my energies on producing the documentary film and book about my grandfather in the Second World War. I had interviewed 130 people, big deal. It goes on PBS and is now shown basically nationally every year since. And then I got back to my book, the book of my life. And if you can imagine this, Anna, 3 more times, a huge thing happens that pushes me to put it aside, do something else, and I come back with it. Anyway, I end up writing the book in 2019, and I submit the manuscript on the 13th of March, 2020, and then I get an email. Kogan Page has furloughed everybody. We're on hold. And I was like, oh, shoot, it's not going to happen. So fortunately it did. We rode out the first lockdown. The company came back to existence, if you will, and we got the book out in January of 2021. So that is the story of the book, if you will. And really the premise is you lead you and how to be you, how to be the authentic you and why that's good for business.
And when you speak about bringing yourself to work, your whole self, you are talking about if you are African American, to speak normally like an African American would speak. If you are gay, not to try to disguise or deny it. Among them, I have a lot of admiration for Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, who is openly gay, and I guess because I don't know, no one questions that. Well, I don't know, 20 years ago, that would have become a big issue. So anyway, can you tell us more detail how a leader can bring himself to work, to the workplace, and just feel comfortable and make everybody else comfortable in the organization?
Well, it's a tricky topic to be talking about because the reality is the most important thing is to feel comfortable with you. And we all have things we don't like about ourselves. It could be the size of my nose, it could be the color of my hair, the waviness, some characteristic about me, or it could be something about my past. And all of these elements make up you. So the issue isn't whether you're gay or black or curly haired, is whether you are comfortable with you. So that's the first point. The second point is, are you good? Because the issue at some level is, well, I know everything about me. I'm an authentic me, but I'm an axe murderer. And that's not good. So you need to, not to, just because you know who you are is necessarily good. So in other words, you also need to show up. If you know you're a lazy bum and you don't want to show up, well, don't bring that to work.
Right.
So when it comes to any of these issues, we have to be able to embrace our whole self, understand our weaknesses, accept them, but not accept that we will be bad, because that isn't acceptable. So that's the line that I would draw, is that bring your whole self to work, be aware of all of you are, and as long as you have the intention of doing good and being good, then it's okay. But if you have bad intentions, then you need to work on yourself some more.
And how do you deal with, let's say there are people who want to bring the whole self to work, but they suffer from imposter syndrome. They don't feel like they are good enough, qualified enough. This is especially an issue among our female counterparts, that they feel like they have to prove themselves that they are capable of doing any kind of work, while their male counterpart, they just have to show the potential that they are good. So it feels like there is a double standard, and of course this creates this imposter syndrome. Am I good enough to do this? Am I do I have enough knowledge? Do I have enough training? Am I a good leader? Is my voice a little bit too, I don't know, on the high level? Do I look, or do I have the right cosmetic?
Yeah. So, I mean, you're right about the double standards. I think that let me start with the position as a white male, which is, if you're a white male, look at deeply your hiring practices yourself. Look at your own biases, and are you prepared to overcome them? Because in the end of the day, for example, when you take a woman who says, I don't know how to do it, the chances are she might have done it 4 times successfully already. And you're gonna walk over or let go of somebody who's not got the potential and the credibility. Whereas you'll take on the guy who says, yeah, I know how to do it, who's never done it before. So I specifically went out of my way, and I have certain really interesting memories of specifically going after hiring a woman to be a general manager of one of my countries, like in Taiwan and in Japan, where culturally it wasn't the norm, but it was something I specifically went out of my way to try to do. As a white male. As a woman, when you have imposter syndrome, or actually anybody who has imposter syndrome, the question is, why do you have it, and what's it going to take for you to get over it? So things to do. First is, I think I subscribe to the idea of getting a mentor, finding somebody, asking them for help. It could be a man or a woman, doesn't matter at this level, but someone who gives you extra step into what does it take to jump over that barrier. And the second of all, look very closely at the company for which you're working.
Okay.
Investigate, ask the hard questions. Do they have a culture that accepts women? Do they have as many toilets on the same floor for women as they do men? That kind of stuff. You know, these are anecdotal, but it just suggests that there are cultures that can be more open to accepting women in higher positions.
Okay, I think society is working little by little on that issue. I mean, it doesn't feel like it's fast enough, but I have the feeling that we are moving in the right directions. What are other ways in which we can bring ourselves to work? We can be better leaders.
Other ways to be ourselves. Well, the first thing really actually is to know who you are.
Mm.
And I can't just jump over that, because in the end of the day, here's the deal. You think you know who you are. You might have a broad idea of who you are, but it's generally speaking far from precise enough. And the key point isn't only who you are, but actually who you want to be. Because that's the exciting thing, is that no matter who you have been till today, think about your future and who you want to be. What is the person you want to be? What do you want people to say about you? And the real hint here is they're not going to be saying, oh, Alain was a CEO. Alain was a podcaster. No, they're going to be talking about your humanity, the type of person you are, how you made them feel. That's what they're going to talk. That's what matters. Life matters. That's what matters in life. And if you can make a precise idea of the person you want to be, then that allows you to follow a path towards getting to be that person. But when you have a broad vision of who you want to be, a non-precise, then it's all over the place, and you can end up having too many choices, each of them seeming to be justifiable and interesting, but you will, without doubt, fail to get to where you want to get to. You'll be frustrated. You won't be satisfied, and you'll probably burn out for trying too hard. So the key work can start now. Doesn't matter what you've done in the past, but to focus on who you want to be, and then allow that to be the guide for all the actions and things to do that you want to do.
Okay, the first stumbling block is you mentioned that many of us don't know who we are. So I guess that's the first question. Our vision is not precise, as you mentioned. How can we go through that first step of finding out who we are?
Right. So it's a long process, Anna. I mean, really, the journey for me from that sort of day when I woke up and said, bloody hell, I don't really know who I am, to the day where I sort of said, I've got now a pretty darn strong idea of the person that I want to be. That took 8 years. So it's not one of those things, oh, I can't wait to do this exercise and I'm going to learn it. But at least having that awakeness, that desire to really dig in on it, that's the first step. The next step is, here's a little exercise I like to recommend to people, is imagine yourself, I'm 56. Let's say I imagine my birthday in 20 years time. So I'll be 75 years old in 19 years time. And at the birthday party, let's say I'm still alive, and I'm going to have a birthday party and I'm going to invite 5 people at my birthday. And I'm going to think about which 5 people, who they are and why they're important to me. Because just that exercise is interesting. Then I'm going to think about what they will say. Hey, Minter, Happy birthday. This is why I love you. And the sentence will be in the voice of each of these individuals and relative to your relationship and the respect that you have for one another. And that becomes the material to help you craft the person you want to be, because you're visualizing it. You're using a technique to help you visualize what it looks like. And then with those words, you come up with some material that shows the phrase, the sentence that would, for me, define my north, which is to elevate the debate and connect people, dots, and ideas. So that's my north. That's the man that I want to be known for. And then once you've got that sentence, then you need to sort of test it, road test it with some of your friends. Not the ones that say, yeah, great idea, Anna. Always say great idea. Anna, that's not you. No, that you're wrong. Those type of friends that are going to give you a true reflection. And then you can start saying, owning it. You need to make sure that each word in that sentence of the person you want to be speaks to you in your language, by the way. I did it in multiple languages, and it obviously changes when you shift languages, because even the way you think of a language changes and your association with words can change. And then that can help you understand who you want to be.
I feel like I'm in a privileged position. I get to speak to people who are highly intelligent, who have accomplished a lot of things. And for me to visualize, I want to be a little bit like this other person, or this person inspire me because he says this, or he or she symbolize this. But for many people, they are so much a bit prisoners of the surrounding. Like for many people, the highest position that they can aspire to be is like the drug dealer in the corner, because they don't know any better. And for some other people, they are fighting really hard to get one of these $15 an hour jobs, because that's they see as one of the biggest accomplishment. And I guess the way that their mind could be open is they will have more exposure to more role models that are in higher, bigger position. But yeah, although I agree with everything that you just said, I think it depends on the circumstances of the person. Where are you in society, and what is your environment like? And I wonder, for those persons who are in those unfortunate environments, how they can aspire to be a little bit more than to have a $15 an hour job.
Yeah, there's no doubt that if you are struggling to get food on the plate, you're surrounded by violence, and you don't know if you're going to live through the day, this all feels a little bit distant. There's no doubt. I mean, I actually have had the experience of living in a ghetto for basically a year of my life. So I can understand, at least appreciate how different this is. And so this list course, and speaking to me about running a big business, $400 million business around the world and traveling 150 days a year, it's a very far away. Yet, I will say this, Anna, everybody has a chance to change. And I want to tell you a little story. And it concerns a lawyer. So I'm not a big fan of lawyers in general, but this guy was a lawyer to a big mafia guy in Chicago, and the biggest mafia guy in Chicago. And he ended up saying when he had a son that he was not proud of the way he was. And so the lawyer, his boss was a guy called Al Capone. And he one day said that the only thing I can leave my son is actually a good reputation. And he was surrounded by very dangerous people, and any move would have been looked at and so on. So what he ends up doing is he participates with the state prosecution and personally helps Capone to be indicted on 5 of the charges. So Capone goes to jail, and the day before Capone is released, this lawyer was mown down on the streets in broad daylight. The day Capone was released, he went and stole the lawyer's wife and did everything he could to try to pay back for the horrible deed that this lawyer had done. So on the dead body of the lawyer, a paper was found in his pocket. And the pocket said, I know that I'll pay the price, but at least I will leave a decent reputation for my son, because anybody can change. I tell you that story why? Because he did a little change, but you have to flash forward to the Second World War, and a Navy pilot is on an aircraft carrier patrolling in the Pacific, and he goes out and he's just doing a patrol with his buddies, and he comes across an entire squadron of Japanese bombers and planes, and there are just 3 of them. They end up going to attack the 40 airplanes. And then this particular pilot ends up shooting down 5 of the planes, and he has no more bullets left. And he starts ramrodding the other planes, such that the Japanese, the entire squadron then just departs and would have otherwise caught the fleet by surprise. That guy then comes back. He lands on the aircraft carrier with something like 500 bullets in the plane. He survives. And today, if you land in Chicago Airport, the name of the airport, you know what it's called? It's called Chicago O'Hare Airport.
Okay, yes.
Because the name of that pilot was Butch O'Hare, and the name of his father was O'Hare, the lawyer of Al Capone.
Wow, what an amazing story. Wow. Okay, well, there I feel like your book is helping us open our minds and hearts, and is helping us become better leaders. I wonder if you could tell us one more time the title of the book and where people can follow you.
That's very kind, Alain. So I like to tell stories. So I took my liberties there. I have a main website, minterdial.com, where I blog, podcast, and I have all sorts of material about my books. Basically, my books are available on all fine e-tailers, hopefully in bookstores soon. But it's called You Lead, How Being Yourself Makes You a Better Leader. It's on audiobook, ebook, and paperback. And I've got 4 books in total, including my Second World War film and biography, The Lost Ring Home. So if you're interested in a piece to pluck you up with courage, love, and honor, you can go check that one out as well.
And you also have a podcast, right?
I do, called Minter Dialogue.
Okay, perfect. We will tune in. Thank you so much for your time.
Alain, it's been a pleasure. Un placer. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.